This is from the Telegraph. Billionaire expat moves back to UK to donate millions to reform. Ben Dello returning from Hong Kong because of Labour cap on donations to political parties from Britons living abroad. So, a cap on donations for people who leave the country, I think that's fair enough. I think if you leave the country, you should still be able to vote, but you are in some sense removing yourself from the consequences of British politics. So a cap on donations, I think it's justifiable. I think that makes sense. But this guy is moving back because he still wants to donate. So this is from the 8th of April, so this is very recent. Let's have a look and find out a bit more about this guy. An expat billionaire is moving back to Britain so he can legally donate millions to Reform UK after accusing Labour of trying to rig the next general election. That's a big accusation. I don't know whether that's him saying it or that's just the Telegraph. Ben Dello, who lives in Hong Kong, gave £4 million to Reform earlier this year before the government changed the law to put a £100,000 cap on donations from Britons living abroad. I mean, 4 million, I think that's more than any other political party has got recently. I think Reform is where the money is currently going. Mr. Dello has accused Sir Keir Starmer of using legislation specifically to target big money expat Reform donors to stack the political deck against the most popular opposition party. I mean, yeah, I think the Reform, I think the money is going to Reform. If the Reform was going to Labour, if the money was going to Labour, then perhaps this change, this donation cap, wouldn't have been put in. I think that's an idea to float and discuss. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it. Writing for the Telegraph, the 42-year-old says he is moving to the UK so he can donate millions more to Reform, build a war chest for Nigel Farage, the Reform leader, to fight the next election. Mr. Dello, reputedly Britain's youngest self-made billionaire, made his fortune as the co-founder of BitMEX, a cryptocurrency trading platform. The Oxford graduate, who has Asperger's syndrome, is irritated by the chronically dishonest culture of government, which makes it difficult for people with autism spectrum disorders to understand what politicians really mean. I mean, a chronically dishonest culture of government, I mean, that pretty much describes most governments at most times, I think. If you could show me a political culture that isn't chronically dishonest, I would honestly be quite surprised. So that's the Telegraph. That's kind of the right-wing view of what's going on. Let's have a look at how the story is framed in The Guardian. Honestly, I hate The Guardian, but just as a different source and a different angle, let's have a look at it. So British crypto billionaire Ben Dello says he's given £4 million to Reform UK. Dello, pardoned by Trump after violating US banking law, describes himself as a champion of free speech. So a champion of free speech, that's important to remember. So it kind of just paraphrases the Telegraph story, says it the same way, to be honest, but adds something that the Telegraph didn't really want to talk about. So Dello was convicted in the US in 2022 after pleading guilty to violating the Bank Secrecy Act by failing to implement adequate anti-money laundering controls at BitMEX, the trillion-dollar cryptocurrency exchange he co-founded. In his Telegraph article, he wrote, "I helped build one of the world's first major crypto trading platforms, fell foul of US regulators, accepted a plea bargain and a civil fine for a regulatory failing that isn't even a crime in the UK." But, I mean, I don't see why it's relevant that it isn't even a crime in the UK. It was a company that was operating in the United States. So this kind of feels a bit icky, like he's trying to avoid responsibility a bit, but then ended up being pardoned by Donald Trump, the US president, anyway. So again, Dello, an Oxford graduate who describes himself as a champion of free speech. He's a champion of free speech. Remember that. So if we look here at the Canary, I've not really come across the Canary much before, to be honest. Having a look at the articles, the other articles, it looks like it's extremely left-wing, perhaps more so than The Guardian, but let's carry on anyway. I think it's worth having a look through the article. Writer threatened for covering Reform donor's conviction. So Ben Dello, our champion of free speech, is a donor to Reform UK. He's also a convicted criminal, since pardoned, who pled guilty to Bank Secrecy Act violations. And we possibly wouldn't have been reporting on any of this if not for the fact that his lawyers tried to bully writer James Wilson. Haven't heard of James Wilson before, to be honest. I have heard of Fraser Nelson. I've seen him on, I think, Trigonometry. I saw him on Trigonometry. Seems like a very standard cookie-cutter Blairite with very soy opinions. Significant. Lawyers for Reform UK donor Ben Dello say that referring to his criminal conviction is a breach of privacy law with no public interest. If highlighting the criminal records of those bankrolling UK political parties is not in the public interest, what is? So here we have James Wilson. Again, I've no idea who this guy is. I have no context for that. Wow, I've just received a threatening letter from Ben Dello's solicitors. They are claiming, among other things, it is unlawful to publish information about Dello's conviction for an anti-money laundering offence in the US. So it looks quite small here, but basically they talk about the European Convention on Human Rights and Article 8, which is the right to a private life. I think the phrase is the right to be forgotten, or something like that. So as it says, Ben Dello, pardoned criminal. Wilson isn't the only person to cover Dello. This is what the Telegraph wrote on the 8th of April. So if this James Wilson, if he's getting threatened with legal action, is the Telegraph getting threatened with legal action as well, or is this just selective, depending on who it is? Obviously, there's form on the internet for this kind of thing. So the Streisand effect. This is how Britannica described the Streisand effect. A phenomenon in which an attempt to censor, hide, or otherwise draw attention away from something only serves to attract more attention to it. The name derives from American singer and actress Barbra Streisand's lawsuit against a photographer in 2003, which drew attention to the photo she was suing to have taken off the internet. And here is the photo here, still on the internet, it would seem. So it's a bit weird. So Reform are a champion of free speech, but somebody is getting sued for referring to the fact that Reform donor Ben Dello was convicted for financial crimes. So that is kind of a bit bizarre. If it's not relevant to talk about it, does that also mean that there's going to be legal action against the United States Attorney's Office, the Southern District of New York? So as it mentions here, third founder of cryptocurrency exchange pleads guilty to Bank Secrecy Act violations. Samuel Reed designed BitMEX as a platform to flout US anti-money laundering rules. If we move down here, US Attorney Damon Williams said, Samuel Reed now has joined his co-founders, Arthur Hayes and Benjamin Dello, in admitting that they caused BitMEX to commit criminal violations of the anti-money laundering laws. So, if James Wilson and the Canary can't talk about it, what about the United States Attorney's Office? Can they have this information on the internet as well, or is that illegal? What about, for example, Wikipedia? Here is Ben Dello's Wikipedia page, and if we scroll down, there's an entire section about Bank Secrecy Act violations and all the details of what happened there. So can that be on the internet, or is that governed by the ECHR as well? And finally, what about Ben Dello himself? Here, he's actually written his own article. So, my autism means I cannot cope with lying politicians. That's why I back Farage. So he talks about why he's moving to the UK, why he's backing them up. And if we come down here, we can see him talk about his legal problems himself. So I graduated from Oxford with a double first in maths and computer science, went to work in fintech in Hong Kong, and then developed a futures trading innovation that's made me wealthy. Along the way, I helped build one of the world's first major crypto trading platforms, fell foul of US regulators, accepted a plea bargain and a civil fine for a regulatory failing that isn't even a crime in the UK, but then ended up being pardoned by Donald Trump, the US president. So is he allowed to discuss it on the internet, but no one else is allowed to discuss it on the internet? Is that the rules? I mean, as a Asperger's autism guy, surely he knows the rules and is able to follow them logically, right? Surely he's not a hypocrite in any particular way about that. I mean, this isn't really a good look for Reform. Reform is supposed to be a party that's different. And how is this kind of guy behaving in a hypocritical way? How is that any different to Keir Starmer, for example? How is it different to David Cameron or Boris Johnson or any other kind of standard issue hypocrite from central casting that UK politics seems to vomit out of its mouth for the last 30 years? So, Reform, they're basically just the same as Tories and Labour, aren't they?